Okay, so once we have our project configured, or if you happen to be using the sample project, the next step is to send that project to a device. All the other menus in Streets version 5 will look exactly identical except when you come to the Tools menu. You will have the normal Work with PDA option, and this is still functional, so if you have an old device that runs Windows Mobiles 5.0 to 6.5, you certainly can communicate with that device using this option here. What we'd like you to do though is to test with this one here, Work with Mobile. So this is the one that's designed to basically work with any type of device as long as it has internet connectivity, and there are a couple things. It needs to be capable of handling HTML5 and also the ability to cache data. Devices can vary, so the more recent devices which have modern web browsers seem to operate much better. I've tested on a iPad first generation device and it works fine, but it does not have good caching ability, so if I lose internet connectivity it doesn't work too well. So those are the things that we would like to learn from you with the devices that you are working with. So what you need to do here is, this is the Streets Mobile Manager. You have two options: sending a configuration to a device and then retrieving data. Initially you will be sending your data to that device. If you were using one of the sample projects, it would show you all the trees available in there, so you could actually send records to that device to be updated. So it asks you for an email address here and a password, and do remember that password because you will need that to retrieve your data. So what's going to happen here is this is going to generate an email from our server, and on a device you will be able to open up a link which will generate the Streets mobile web forms. So this might take a couple seconds to process. Okay, so I actually just received this email. So it went to the server generated this link. Now I'm going to go to a mobile device that I have connected. So if you were sending this to an iPad or a different device, you wouldn't need to connect that directly to the computer. So this is sent by email. So if you were working with multiple devices, you would just need to forward this link to those other devices or folks who are doing data collection for this particular project. There's a little bit of a delay between what you're seeing on the screen and what I'm seeing on my actual cell phone, so bear with me here. So all I'm doing now is clicking on that link. And what that should do is activate the Streets web form. So it takes a little bit of time to actually generate, and if you are sending existing records, it will take a lot more time because it is basically running all those new records onto this web form, so it's a bit more data that it's processing. This is just an empty configuration. So somewhat self-explanatory. It's just asking you for surveyor information. So you would just go down and click into that field, and my Android looks a little bit different than what you might see on an iPhone or an iPad or a different device. Just enter your data in there and then select begin. So it kind of comes to this screen here, and you have this somewhat of a home looking icon, I guess, and then the plus. So to add trees, select that. So plus is always adding records. So you would pretty much go down the same process as you would enter any tree. So this is, for mine, when I hit on zone, it generates somewhat of a dialog box where I can change these values. I know on the iPhones and iPads, I think it generates somewhat of like a thumb wheel. And what's kind of neat is once you have this up here, you just click next, and then it goes down to the next open dialog box that you need to populate. So I'm just going to run through and enter some data in here. And I'll click done to close that dialog box. So one of the things to keep in mind is that this is a web browser. So you need to be careful. If you close this, you could be in trouble. It's not an app. It's not running a program on this device as the old system. This is pretty much just a web page that you're looking at. So you have to be careful about going back and forth. One of the things that you might find, you have this back and forward arrow. If I have this all filled in and hit this back key here, a lot of this data will be brought back to the default. So it caches what I found once you move forward. So now if I were to go back, my data should be as I had it set originally. So in this case, let's say one thing with street names, you have to hit this plus key, and then it allows you to enter a street. It generates a new menu. It will then be available in the next drop down for the next tree. So I'll just continue through here. It's fairly self-explanatory. If there's something that I think we need to point out, I certainly can. If you activated any of the management screens, feel free to test those out as well. If you'd like to test the pest detection, data entry screens, feel free to do so too. And at this point, once I advance past the pest tab, so if I wanted to enter a new tree, I would hit the plus button and I can go ahead and do that. So I'll just add one more on here real quickly. So if I wanted, you can go back and edit a record at this point. You have to page through the screens though to get to those pages. Okay, so I would advise you to work with small amounts of data initially until you get the hang of this, just because you don't want to spend a whole lot of time entering 25 trees and then find out that there's an issue or you're not able to communicate properly. So start small and go from there. So this home button, once you have some trees entered, this will bring you back to the base screen or home screen. And so when you have data ready, you can see you have this submit data option here. So I'm going to go ahead and click that, and it tells me I have 2 new trees entered. I'm just going to submit that. It says your data has been submitted. So at this point, now I just basically sent those 2 trees back to the server. I could go in iTree Streets and retrieve those. So that's something to consider too if you are doing a project and you're out in the field. There's no limit to how many times you actually can submit data. So if you want to feel safe, you can submit after so many trees as opposed to waiting until you have a whole lot and something may go wrong with your device or so forth. I guess that's up to you, and maybe one of the things in testing you might kind of discover. I could continue on collecting trees. What I'm going to do is just close this out for now, and I just want to show you now, going back to iTree Streets, how it looks when we go to retrieve data. So after you submit data, you go back to the Work with Mobile option in that project, and then we're just going to change the toggle button to retrieve project data. And here's where you need to know that password. So this allows you to grab that data on the server and it tells you that it successfully brought those over. Saves the project. We can go in and look at those records if we want to verify that. One of the things that we are interested in is the device's ability, if you lose connectivity, to keep adding records. So that's something that you might be able to do or simulate by turning on airplane mode, which will basically shut off Wi-Fi and cell phone connectivity. And so this goes back to the differences in devices. If your device is very modern and can run HTML5 and has good caching capability, you should be able to continue with record collection and advance through these menus. I'm just going to populate these real quickly. What you won't be able to do, though, because you don't have internet connectivity, is to actually submit this data, but it'll store it in the cache. So that's one of the things that we're interested in, is does an iPad 2 allow for this? Does a iPhone 2 or 3 allow for this properly? We don't know the limits and how the caching is going to interact with these various devices. So I'm working with a Samsung Galaxy S3, which is pretty new, and it seems to handle things pretty well, but I don't know how many trees I could actually enter this way before I hit some limit. Maybe I won't. But I can't go back right now and submit that. It doesn't let me get to that option screen to submit that data because I'm in airplane mode. So the other thing that we're interested in is feedback on these forms, and also if you run into any errors. Screenshots are always helpful. I know that you won't be able to grab screen captures on devices and so forth, so we'll have to kind of deal with your best description if possible, but also knowing what were you doing to generate that error will be helpful also, or recommendations on how to make this better, and realizing that there are some limitations, as I mentioned, just because it is a web form and not an application, so we're somewhat constrained to the design of what we can do and can't do. All right, well, with that, if you have any questions, feel free to give me a ring, and thank you for your time.